How's it going, gamers? My name is Rushcode, and recently we hit 100 subs. Thanks guys for continuing to support this channel. Today's video is a tutorial about how to randomly or procedurally generate certain things about textures, such as the color, the scale, the orientation, and the text. For example, if we come over here and push this button, you'll see that this texture that I've placed on the wall will change in terms of size, rotation, color, the name on the text, and even the number. Here's what the blueprint of the texture object looks like. So we have the texture itself and a name text and a digit text so that I can control those components independently. Since there are 5 separate things that we'll be learning how to do, I figured it would be easier to separate them into 5 custom events here, and we'll go through them one at a time. This is roughly what they all look like, the name text being the biggest one here to do. Let's get started. First, import some kind of picture or image file as a texture. Now create a new actor blueprint, calling it paper texture. This is what we'll be putting the texture into. Right-click our texture file, create material. In this material, we want to disconnect the nodes and reconnect them to something called a HueShift. This is how we're going to control the color randomly. But we also need a parameter, so we'll call this HueParam, and that will control the percentage of hue we're putting in. And the hue will reset after every value of 1. It will cycle through, so for example, if you put 0.5, the color will change to something yellowish. If you put it at 1.5, it'll do the exact same thing. So whatever values we're going to put in later, keep in mind that it just needs to be between 0 and 1. Now create a plane in your paper texture blueprint and drag that material onto it. Rotate the plane so that it's standing upright and round off the values as well, because rotation works a little funny in 3 dimensions. Also take note that this will affect the way we scale it, which we will see in a moment. Drag in some text to represent the name we're going to put in and the digit. Now we're ready to make our 5 custom events. The first one being update scale. You have a couple of options in how you want to scale it. You can either scale by setting the actor scale 3D, or you can set the actor relative scale 3D. I'm not sure what the difference is between these two. I haven't noticed any difference, but if there is, then please let me know down in the comments below. I would love to know. From here, we want to scale the X by a random float number, but we want to control the range that's in, so we will say that this is between 1 and 3, and you'll want to connect this to the Y and Z scale as well, because our texture plane is actually going to scale according to X and Y because it's originally sitting on 2 dimensions, the X and Y. We just rotated it up to stand upright. On the other hand, the text components are existing in the Z scale, so we need the Z scale to change for the text's sake. To test if this works, let's connect it up to our event begin play node and put a copy of this blueprint into the wall object that I made before. When we hit play, you can see that the size is different every time we run a new iteration of this game. So we know it works. We can get on to the next custom event, update rotate. This event will be used to control how much we rotate our object. And again, there's 2 options, set actor rotation and set actor relative rotation. Setting the actor rotation is a bit like just adding a local rotation, and it causes the texture to keep rotating and turning around rather than resetting every time to a new angle. So instead, we want to do set actor relative rotation. Every time this triggers, it will reset the orientation and give you a new one based on the angle you specify, rather than stacking up the effects. Plug in a random float in range of -20 to 20 degrees for the X rotation. Because the default, for example, when you make a cube, you can see that the default X direction is the red axis, and we want to rotate around that axis. Connecting this up, let's have a look and see if this works. So starting it up, we can see that the texture will rotate by a maximum of 20 degrees one way or the other. Playing it again, we can see it's pointing the other way. So that works, fantastic. Moving on to the next one, which is to do with the color. We'll call it update hue. This one's pretty special. It took me a while to figure it out. You want to use a node called set scale parameter value on materials. It automatically connects to our plane because that's the only thing that has a material. And we want to name the parameter HueParam because that is what it's going to find in the material that we're trying to change. So let's connect a random float node. By default, this is only between 0 and 1. And playing this in the game, we can see that the color changes to different things like teal or some kind of magenta pink. The next one we want to do is update text. Now this one's pretty cool. If you ever wanted to import a list of names or words from a text file, let's say, into Unreal Engine, this is a quick way to do it without having to deal with the file itself. First, we set text for our name text. Next, we bring in our format text node. And this is pretty special because it can accept multi-line text. So if you copy the text from a text file and paste it in here, it will transfer successfully. And I'm making sure there's a semicolon at the end of each line here because that is going to act as our delimiter, which informs the code on how to separate out the lines, because we're going to convert this into an array of words. The node we want to use for this is parse into array. I love it. It will convert everything given that your delimiter is specified as a semicolon. So the text will convert into a string fed into this array node, and then an array is generated from that. And now we can pull out a random calling node, which will just pull out a random item from that array and take it from a string converted back into a text using toText, which we then feed back into setText. So when we play the game, you can see that the code will pull a random word from what we put into format text and display that in our name text placeholder, which for me is just mind-blowing that it can randomly do something like that with just lines of text. Okay, last custom event, update digit. This one's pretty straightforward. We set the text for digit text, bring up a random integer node, setting the max value to 10 because that way it will generate numbers between 0 and 9, convert that into a text, hook it back into setText and it will automatically convert from integer to text. And let's test it out. Pretty straightforward. The digit just randomly generates into whatever it wants between 0 and 9, along with the scale, the name, the rotation, and the color. The last thing I wanted to cover was how we can control these triggers either in-game or at the start of the game. As you can see, this works for my example on the left, and this is what we want for our tutorial version. As we've already seen, Event Begin Play will allow us to generate all of this randomly at the start of the game. If you want to control it during gameplay, then you need to create another custom event like Randomize Texture, for example, and hook that in, and then go to the wall blueprint and call it from there. And oh, whoops, so I've actually given this the same name as the other custom event, Randomize Texture. They are completely different nodes, different events, just a coincidence that they have the same name. Create a sequence node and cast it to our paper texture. My understanding of cast is that it only works well with parent actors, so we need to explain to it that this is actually a child actor, the paper texture, because that's how we're referencing it inside the wall component. So grab paper texture, convert it into or reference it as a child actor, and then plug that. As paper texture, we have a custom event known as Randomize Texture, the one we just made before. This is not related to the one up there. This will call all the 5 events we just made in the tutorial. And make sure that paper texture is not actually a child of a child object. It needs to be a child of the main scene component for this to work properly. And just as a side note, this bit up here is my code for controlling the example paper texture that I made on the left side of the wall. It's essentially the same thing, but I've just used slightly different naming conventions. So when we play the game, you can see that hitting the button will allow us to randomly generate the texture differently every single time. And when you connect Event Begin Play, you'll have now both nodes connected to our list of triggers, which means that the game will randomly generate a texture at the start of the game and allow you to randomly control it by pushing the button during gameplay. And that is the end of the tutorial. I hope this helps someone out there. Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys. And if you liked it, smash like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Rushcode out!